This is exciting. Welcome. Thank you. My name is Laura Holly, and I am the Director of Prevention here at Meridian. Meridian is a comprehensive provider of mental illness and substance misuse disorders. We see about 21,000 people a year, and this year is our 50-year anniversary. So we're doing kinds of exciting things for that throughout this year, and we're proud of what we've been able to provide for the community for a half a century. So that's an exciting thing. I have been with Meridian for about 3.5 years, which feels like nothing after I say that, right? But I have worked in or around prevention and mental health services for about 20 years. I'm a mental health first aid instructor. I'm also a master resilience trainer and a subject matter expert on stress management and resiliency skills. So today I want to talk about our topic today that we're going to be unpacking is talking about self-harm and suicide. Sort of unpacking those as much as we can do in an hour, right? And hopefully leaving with some tools about how to talk to people when we are concerned about self-harm or suicide, how to have those conversations, what are the important things that we need to pay attention to, and how to execute that, right? So I am pretty passionate about reducing stigma and demystifying mental health struggles and services and all of that. I know some of you have seen me before, Mary, hi. So you know that about me. But I also talk about things very directly because I think that's important when we're talking about some of these difficult topics. So I want to kind of give you that disclaimer up front, right? That this stuff is important to talk about, but it's hard to talk about. So take care of yourself as we talk about this for this hour. If you want to interject with anything, feel free. This is a small enough group right now to unmute, interrupt me, ask questions. I will also ask if anyone has questions at the end, and feel free to use the chat feature. I may miss it, but Joy Riddle's also on with us. Hi, Joy, and she's going to monitor that chat for me. And if she can answer those questions, she will, or she'll interrupt me and get me to hop on there. So that's kind of logistically how we're going to do it, okay? Suicide and harm, they don't happen out of thin air, right? Okay, so this is a risk. That crisis is a risk that we run as a result of so many other things, right? Of certain mental health challenges, depression, suicide, depression, anxiety, trauma, substance misuse, right? When those things are present, we run the risk of meeting with these higher level crises, okay? So it's important before we really get into the nitty gritty of self-harm and suicide to spend just a few minutes talking about where that begins, right? Because just like anything else, I mean, if you think about your physical health, right? Early intervention is so important, right? That's like a whole other webinar by itself, but we're gonna touch on it real briefly because it's super relevant when you're talking about high level crisis, okay? So let me start with, I'm going to put a poll up. If you're in a position where you can answer this question, go ahead and answer that real quick for me. Perfect. Okay. I think that's everybody. Yep, that's everybody. Perfect. Okay. So you guys got it right. All right. So it is 18.5% of the population on average is walking around with a mental health challenge at any given time, right? It's super normal. This is a huge percentage when you think about it. You think about any room you walk into and do some quick math, what's, close to 20% of those folks are struggling in some way with their mental health, right? And so it's super common. It's really common, and that's important to know, right? It's important to know for stigma for a lot of different reasons, right? But if it's common, right, then that begs the question. Depression and anxiety are a very normal part of the range of human experiences. Very normal, right? It is an abnormal, normal event. The best way that the analogy I love to use is a sore throat, right? So if you have a sore throat, you know that is not your baseline. Something is quote unquote wrong. You're not supposed to hurt. Your throat is not supposed to hurt. But it's also a pretty normal, abnormal event. We've had a sore throat before. We can expect to have one again in our life, right? Before COVID, the doctor wasn't our first call when we had a sore throat, right? There are things that we know that we can do at home, right? I might have some hot tea with some honey in it. I might not go out tonight. I might cancel my dinner plans. I might take a throat drop, right? And the expectation is that I'm going to feel better in a short period of time. And that if I don't, I'm going to call the doctor and I'm going to say, hey, my throat drops aren't working, right? Mental health is the same way. So if we know that depression and anxiety can be super normal, how do we know when it's not, right? The same kind of way we would know when a sore throat isn't, right? There are things we know we can do at home. The expectation is some time passes and we're going to feel better, okay? So for those things, what we look at is duration and impact. We look at how long has this been going on, and we look at about 2 weeks or more when it comes to depression, right? And is it impacting my ability to work, carry out my daily activities, and have satisfying relationships? So we want to make sure that we're looking at those things for a period of 2 weeks or more, right? If you have extreme anxiety or you're really struggling with depression and it's been a couple of days or a week, it's probably going to impact you. You might need to take a day off of work. You might not be connecting with the people in your life, but it's this brief period of time, right? And if our throat drops to work and we come out of that, that can be really normal, okay? But it's not necessarily how it's viewed. So let me ask you the next question I have. How long do people wait, right? So take a look at this. How much time on average does a person wait between the onset of symptoms and seeking appropriate professional help? Do we think it's 10 years or do we think it's 10 months? What do we think? It is actually 10 years. On average, people are waiting 10 years. I mean, you look at that, you think 10 months is a really long time to suffer, right? But 10 years people are waiting. And a lot of things are happening in those 10 years, right? It's not like we're just kind of staying in that same place from the onset of symptoms to appropriate professional help. We're developing other issues, right? We're having interruptions in our relationships, in our education, in our employment, an increased probability of brushes with the law, and negative coping strategies up to and including substance misuse, right? So all of that is happening in those 10 years, which makes recovery harder and more complicated. Still possible, but not easy, right? Not as easy as it would have been if we kind of caught it when it was 1 or 2 issues versus 10 years worth of things that have now developed, right? So what happens in those 10 years too, you can see all those things line up. Think about that. Interruptions in our relationships, our jobs, our education. Now we're in trouble with the law. Now we're using substances. Now we have 2 or 3 issues going on, right? Our risk for suicide and self-harm has now increased greatly, right? And so that's the crisis risk that we're going to kind of unpack and talk about right now, okay? It's one of the reasons why it's super important to intervene. Now, here's another thing. People are far more likely to seek professional help when somebody close to them suggests it. We know that. We know that from studies of folks who have gotten professional help. And they say, you know, so-and-so, so-and-so, and so-and-so said that this was a good idea, right? They might tell you to buzz off when you suggest it, but it still matters. It still impacts that 10 years and it makes that time shorter. So it's really important that we have these conversations with people that we care about and we suggest professional help. But like, how do we do that? That's the barrier. A lot of people don't even know how to have those conversations, right? And that's a normal fear. It's a normal barrier. There's a little bit of a blueprint that I'll share with you. There's 3 components of a good conversation about somebody's mental health, right? Number 1, always lead with expressing your concern. It's always the right answer to say, I'm concerned about you, I'm worried about you, you know, this is my concern. Follow that immediately by the why. Very neutral observation. I am concerned about you, here's why, right? We want to be as non-judgmental as possible. And so I'll give you an example of kind of what that looks like. If you're noticing that somebody is withdrawing from all of their friends and activities and family, and you want to say, hey, like you've checked out of your life, right? A way that we can word that would be to just give some facts instead of you're withdrawing from everybody, to say, hey, I'm concerned about you. I noticed that you haven't been as engaged. We haven't had lunch in a long time. We used to do that a lot. You're not joining us for coffee, you know, and then follow it. This is the 3rd component by, Are you okay? Or is there something that you want to talk about? I'm here if you want to talk, right? So we want to express our concern, very non-judgmentally express the why, share the observations, very neutral, neutralize that as much as possible, and then follow it up with the question, okay, if they're okay. In the course of that conversation, that's where we can encourage and suggest professional help. And we want to stay away from telling somebody what they should and shouldn't do. So if you've heard me speak before, if you've been in any of my classes, you know that I think should is a bad word, right? So we don't want to should on ourselves and we don't want to should on other people. So we got to stop shoulding all over the place. So let's get that word out of our vocabulary, or at least recognize it when we hear ourselves say it and just go back and reframe that, right? We just want to suggest, let people know help is there, help is available, okay? So that's going to be important. Cut briefly before I move on, because this will be relevant when we move on to really talking about self-harm and suicide. The places that we can help somebody get immediate help right now. Of course, there are places like Meridian, right, where we can call the access line, which is 352-374-5600. We'll drop that in the chat, where you can call our access line and you can get plugged into starting some kind of treatment plan and get in with a counselor, right? It's not the only option. There's we have care connection centers. You can walk in. They're located next to our CSUs. We have telehealth. We're on our website. You can click tell me about telehealth and answer a few questions. If you're in a crisis, you can telehealth with a clinician in that moment, right? So that's something, if you're trying to help somebody in the moment, you can sit down with them, you can pull these resources up. There's also, if you're located in Alachua County, the Alachua County Crisis Line, it responds to your location, right? If you're located in North Central Florida and the surrounding counties, that's Meridian's mobile response team. If you're located outside of the area, every county in the state of Florida has a mobile response or a crisis response team. So Google that, just Google mobile response team with your county's name. Know that before you need it, right? That's a really good tool to know how to talk to people and to know what resources to share. If you're located outside of the state of Florida, give it a shot anyway. Use your county name and not your state name or your city name. Start there and see if that's something that's available in your state, or if there is a response team or a crisis team that you can call, okay? So knowing that, moving into self-harm. So self-harm, let me start. Here's a poll that's got a couple of questions in it. These are true and false questions that'll give us kind of a starting point to start unpacking some of this more difficult stuff. Right now, we're going to talk about, there we go, self-harm. There's 3 questions here I want you guys to answer. We've got self-harm is a failed suicide attempt. We're going to select true or false on that. And we're going to, the next question is self-harm is an attention-seeking behavior. We're going to select true or false on that. And then the last one is self-harm can be a good thing. And we're going to select true or false on that. Okay, perfect. I see some responses coming in. Perfect. Nice. Nice. Okay, good. All right, so here's what we got here. All right, so let's unpack these for a second. So first, let me define, sorry, and I should have done this before I launched the poll, but what is self-harm, right? Self-harm is any intentional behavior, self-directed intentional behavior designed to harm the body, and your intent is not to die, right? So the intention is not to kill yourself, but the intention is to hurt yourself on purpose. One of the most recognizable that everybody kind of thinks of is cutting. There's also so many others, right? There's burning and different things that we can do to harm our body, okay? But cutting, self-harm, that sort of thing. Okay, so which brings us to question 1. Self-harm is a failed suicide attempt. That is false, okay? The intent really matters when it's self-harm. And the intent for self-harm is not to die. Do people harm themselves sometimes in a failed suicide attempt? Sure, but that's a separate thing, okay? Number 2, self-harm is an attention-seeking behavior. This is a trick question. You may or may not have noticed that I allowed you to choose both in this one. The other ones I made you choose between one or the other, but I allowed you to choose both answers in this one because that's the answer, okay? I would change one word in that statement to make it true, and that is an attention-needing behavior, okay? Yes, this can be a form of communication, right? Trying to communicate some underlying distress that we can't quite communicate otherwise, okay? So to that end, I would say the reason I changed seeking to needing, that if this is the behavior that someone is using to get attention, they need some attention, and let's give them that attention, right? So we say that not as a bad thing. It's not like, oh, you just want attention, right? No, this is, please, this is a cry for attention, and let's respond to that need, okay? So it's both. Self-harm can be a good thing, all right? Let me put a pin in that one really quick, and we're gonna go back to that in 1 second. I do wanna sidebar and say that self-harm is not in and of itself a thing. And by that, I mean, you don't get diagnosed with self-harm, right? It's a behavior that is symptomatic of underlying distress, of significant underlying distress. So it's important to know that, and here's why. Because if we are made aware of self-harm in somebody that we care about, this is a very difficult thing to come in contact with, right? We don't want the person to hurt themselves anymore. But if we focus on changing that behavior, it will be like you are a hamster that got on a wheel and you are just going to keep going. You got to get off of that wheel, because the real problem is the underlying distress that is causing that behavior, okay? And that's why we need professional help for self-harm, because we got to figure out what that underlying distress is, and that's what needs to be addressed and set right in order for that behavior to stop. The reason for that is the behavior is a coping mechanism, okay? It is a negative coping mechanism, absolutely, but it is a coping mechanism nonetheless. To that end, that is what makes number 3 true, because if it is the coping mechanism that is preventing suicide, then it is keeping the person alive. That's an uncomfortable truth, a very uncomfortable truth, but it is a truth nonetheless. And we need to know that as we're going into some of these conversations, because we need to be able to navigate that and know that if we hyper focus on stopping the behavior, and we are not trained clinicians, what happens if we remove someone's coping mechanism? And that's what was keeping them alive. So it's too complicated for someone who's not a clinician. What we can be best serve somebody by doing is thank them for sharing, right? That's always a wonderful thing when someone's like, hey, you know, this is what's going on with me. Gosh, thank you. That can't be easy, right? Don't pass any negative judgments, no matter what you feel or think on the inside. That's not the helpful thing to share, right? It's okay to say it hurts me that you're hurting yourself, right? I don't like to see you hurt, right? That's okay. But we want to avoid things like, why would you do that to yourself? That's not helpful, right? All those things that maybe are true, right? But not, accuracy doesn't always equal helpfulness, right? So we want to kind of stay away from that and remember that we are talking to somebody who is in distress and who might lack the mental clarity in that moment to really see it the same way that you do. To that end, the why, while a good question to ask, what has you so upset that this is what you're doing? The why is never going to make sense to you. You can expect that if the why is shared with you, there's a part of you that's going to go, that's why you're hurting yourself, right? That's a normal way to think. We want to make sure we don't let that show on our face or in our words, because it can actually set the person back from getting professional help, right? So we want to make sure that we ask that question, because then that gives them an outlet. What has you so upset that this is what's happening in your life, right? We want to encourage them to get that professional help, walk them through getting that professional help, right? Like that, and we can even give them that information. Hey, this is symptomatic that something else is going on, and you know, let's get that fixed so you feel better. You don't have to suffer. Recovery is possible, right? And so we want to help that person with it. Okay. So self-harm, yes, can be a good thing. Ugh, we don't like saying that. We don't like that that's true, but it is, okay, because it is a coping mechanism. And I share that again so that we make sure that we're really responsible with the way that we walk through these conversations, okay? So diving into what we came here to talk about, which is suicide, okay? Let's start with another poll on that. Okay. This one has 4 questions, and those questions are, if a person is seriously considering suicide, there is nothing you can do. We hear that a lot, right? We hear people say, well, if they really have their heart set on it, like you're not even gonna know, they're not even gonna threaten, right? So we hear that. let's unpack, is that accurate or not, right? And then, oh, I found a typo. A person who is suicidal will always be suicidal, or as I wrote, will also be suicidal. So there's my typo. But, you know, to what extent is that true or false? We want to look at that, okay? The next one we want to look at is improvement following a suicide crisis means that the risk of suicide is over. So let's determine if that's true or false. And asking someone if they have thoughts about suicide will put the idea in their head and encourage them to do it, okay? So we want to talk about those things right there. Okay, so here's what you guys came up with, and let's talk about it. Okay, the first one. If a person is seriously considering suicide, there is nothing that you can do. And you guys got that right. That is false. Okay. We do hear that a lot. That's sort of a common thing to fall into, where we say, well, you know, if they really have their heart set on it, like they've made their decision, and we're not going to be able to do anything about it, right? Suicide crises are very time limited. Okay. And now, if we don't fix the underlying distress, we're going to be back in that place again. But the actual active crisis is time limited. It's usually brief, okay? And intervention saves lives. It just absolutely does. When we intervene, it can save a life, all right? I just read this morning. It's interesting that this is where I find myself today. And this morning, a friend of mine actually posted a memory on Facebook. You know how you can repost your memories. And she was like, gosh, this doesn't even seem like the same person, but I wanted to share this, that you know, that happened to me a year ago, and for awareness and all of that. And it was a memory of her telling about something that had happened a year prior. So now we're 2 years removed from it. But she described a very dark night in her life where she had thought about suicide. And she was literally sitting in her living room holding a firearm, and she reached out to several friends. And she is very religious. She has, you know, spirituality is a huge part of her life. Her faith and her church life is a very big part of her life. And she'd reached out to some friends via text message as she was sitting there in her living room. And she reached out to a friend and said, you know, I'm having these dark thoughts, and I'm not, you know, not okay. And the first friend said, I'm so sorry, and I'll be praying for you. And the second friend said something similar. And she gave it one more shot, and that person came over. And that's why she's alive today, right? So thoughts and prayers are wonderful. I also believe in that, but we also need to take action, right? And so it's really important to know that there are tangible things in the here and now on earth that you can do that can really help folks, you know? And I thought that was really an interesting story that she told about what it can be like to reach out and not get that tangible support, right? So let's make sure that we're doing that, right? There's always something that we can do. There are also many warning signs. Typically, a person who dies by suicide leaves many warning signs. That is an uncomfortable truth as well. And I'll tell you why that's uncomfortable and why we include it anyway, okay? It's uncomfortable, like, for me, because I lost a friend to suicide in 2010, didn't see any of the signs, right? So we don't include it to make people feel guilty or like they missed something, right? Because when I look back at my friend's death, those, yeah, they were signs. Hindsight is always 20/20, right? But in the moment, was anything reasonable that any one of us could have picked up on? No, right? And I know that, but we include it in the training because it's very, very important to know that you may not pick up on all those signs, right? So if anything ever hits you the wrong way, or your intuition tells you this isn't right, act on it, right? Know that there are signs, know that sometimes they're small, they're subtle. So if you're like, I don't love that, right? Let's make sure we're following up with people and we're intervening, right? That's why that's included. Number two, a person who is suicidal will always be suicidal, okay? And you guys got that right. False. But here's where that one gets tricky, okay? Here's where that one gets a little tricky. Yeah, we know that that doesn't mean they're always suicidal, but we also know that a risk factor for suicide is a previous attempt, right? So how do we reconcile those two things? If we know that having previously attempted suicide makes someone more likely to have that crisis again in the future, how do we steer clear of judgment and stigma and all of that, right? And also understand that that doesn't mean they're going to be in that place forever. Here's the best analogy. I'm a huge fan of like equating mental health questions and issues with physical health questions and issues, because it's really the same thing, okay? If I break my ankle, as an example, right? And it's bad, like it's bad. And I got pins in it, I had surgery, all of that, right? Now my ankle has healed. It's not broken anymore. You're not going to watch me walk around at work and go, is today the day her ankle's going to give out again, right? You're not going to stop inviting me places. Or if I say, hey, let's go for a walk, or I'm going to go for a run, right? You're going to assume I can do that. My ankle is not broken anymore, right? But do I have a vulnerability in that ankle? Yeah, I might, right? Am I going to go to the doctor quicker than you would if I feel something in that ankle? Yeah, probably, right? Are there things I know that I may have to do to take care of that ankle in a special way because it had that previous break? Yeah, okay. But I also am not walking around on an ankle that is still currently and actively broken, right? Having had a previous suicide attempt is the same. Have we created a vulnerability? Sure, the statistics tell us that, we know that, right? But am I gonna walk around actively suicidal and having to worry about that 24/7 for the rest of my life? No, right? So you see kind of how that reconciles, all right? And that's an important thing to know. Okay. Improvement following a suicide crisis means that the risk of suicide is over. And you guys got that right, that it's false. But I want to talk about why. When I first heard this, and even in my years of experience, I had not heard this until I became a mental health first aid instructor. I had not heard this statistic that most people who die by suicide, most, not a small percentage, not some, most, do so within 3 months of the onset of a period of improvement. That blew my mind when I heard that, okay? Here's why. Our brains and our bodies are wired with such great fail safes that keep us alive, right? We know about some of them, fight or flight, all of that stuff, right? These are good instincts that we have as human beings, the way that we're wired. One of them is when it gets really dark, we lose the inability to take action, okay? So we lose the ability to act, no motivation. And so sometimes when we are in that dark place and having thoughts and behaviors of suicide, it is because we are so low that we're unable to act on that, right? Now we've gotten a little bit of treatment. We're starting to feel better, right? But it's a marathon, not a sprint. We don't come up from that overnight, right? So we're getting some help. We're in a treatment. Things are looking up and getting better. Our energy has returned. Our ability to take action has returned. We only need one bad day, okay? And so that's important in that time frame, because here's what's also happening in your life at that time frame. People are happy that you're better, right? So they've stopped actively checking in with you. So when we have somebody that we care about that we know has recently had a suicide crisis, let's pay very close attention 30, 60, 90 days out. Okay, let's make sure that we are paying attention, that we are tracking, that we are checking in with them. It can really make a huge difference as they are on that road to recovery. Let's celebrate that, but let's not assume that that happened overnight, right? So that's an interesting thing that I want to make sure everybody takes away with them today. And here's my favorite question, so I saved it for last, right? Asking someone if they have thoughts about suicide will put the idea in their head and encourage them to do it. And that is false. However, sitting here, oh, I thought I had shared that with you already. Well, there's the answers. Sharing, here's the thing, sitting here in a webinar, in a training room, we know that that's the right answer. But out there in real life, that's a hard step to take, to ask someone, because here's the thing, not all lots of threats of suicide are vague, right? They're vague. They come across as, I don't know, maybes, right? They come across as these vague statements about not wanting to be here anymore, or what's the point, or just a general feeling you get about somebody when you think that they're not okay and they're not safe, right? It's often not, hey, I'm thinking of killing myself, right? That's often not how these conversations go. So in order to say the word to somebody and ask the question, you have to be the one that takes 2 or 3 steps forward in the conversation. And that always feels scary. It always will feel scary. I have lost touch of how many times I have asked this question of someone, and it has never, ever, ever gotten where it feels better. It's just never going to feel good to ask this question, right? But you're capable of doing it. And I would encourage you to do so, right? We always feel like, gosh, no, I'm not going to ask that question, right? And here's the question that we must ask. You have to look at somebody and say, are you thinking of killing yourself? Or are you considering suicide? You have to say the actual words. There's a couple of reasons why we have to say the words. Number one, it's a different question. If we say hurting yourself, that's an easy question. It's much easier. Oh, are you going to hurt yourself? You're not going to hurt yourself, are you? You're not thinking of hurting yourself. That's not the same question. We just covered hurting, right? It's 2 totally different things. The other thing is, what if the person picked a method that they don't believe is going to hurt? I can say, no, I'm not going to hurt myself, and it's accurate, okay? Or I'm viewing it as that I'm going to end my pain, right? So nope, I am not going to hurt myself, right? So it's important to ask, are you going to kill yourself? Are you thinking of killing yourself? Are you thinking of suicide? Have you thought about this, right? It's a hard question to get out of your mouth, but it's an important one, okay? Now, let's talk about the possible answers you can get, all right? You can, the no is exactly, it comes in the form of why you were afraid of asking it in the first place, right? The no is, what? Why would you ask me that, right? That's the, you're made out to look ridiculous. You kind of feel embarrassed. You ask the question. That's a win. That's exactly what we want. That's a no, okay? Everything else is a not no. It's a maybe or a yes, okay? And here's what I mean by that. No one is gonna go, I shouldn't say no one, but most people are not gonna say, why, yes, I am thinking of killing myself. Thank you for asking, right? It's that I wish the conversations were that easy, but they're not, okay? So what the yes looks like is, I don't know, maybe, no, not really, right? That's what the answers look like. Well, I mean, not right now, but I'd be lying if I didn't say I've never thought of it. That's what the not no looks like, okay? So here's the next thing. If you get a not no or a yes, I've got bad news for you. You got some more uncomfortable questions you have to ask, okay? And what those are there's no specific words that you need to use here, but you do need to find out if they have a plan, okay? And that's a very uncomfortable conversation to ask, but there are different levels of thoughts of suicide. And somebody who has thoughts of suicide may or may not be actively suicidal, so that's important. And so that is that's something that I want you to pay attention to. Okay, so let's ask for a plan. I'll give you an example of what this looks like in real life. My stepson is grown, and he is a United States Air Force veteran. And a couple of years ago, I had to ask him this question. I've asked a lot of people this question, but this one was notable because it was somebody very close to me, right? So I, took a deep breath and said, hey, the way it came out when I said it was, this feels like you're talking about suicide. Are you talking about suicide? Is that a conversation that we need to have? And I got a not no. I mean, it would be easier, but like, no, not really. And I went, okay. And I said, thanks for sharing that with me, because that buys me some time, right? So thanking someone for sharing difficult things is always the right answer. It's always a good answer. And then I said to him, how far along are you in this thought process? Like, have you thought about how or anything like that? And his answer was, well, I have plenty of firearms. And I went, okay, well, let's have dad pick those up and put them in our garage until we can figure this out, right? So eliminating the danger while we are seeking professional help can be really, really helpful. It can help keep someone alive. There was a training that I took through the military that really focused on, I used to work for the Department of Defense, that really, really focused on that, how to keep somebody alive today and right now. And really everything that they talked about in that particular training was centered around, was centered around like eliminating that immediate threat that they were on. So if it was like, oh, have you thought about how you're going to do this? Yeah, well, I figured I'd just take an entire bottle of my pain pills. Okay. How many do you need to take in a day? Well, I take 2. Great. Can I give you 2? And can I hold the bottle while we sort this out? Okay. That can be really worthwhile. To eliminate the method can be very helpful. Okay. So in my stepson's case, we also determined that he shouldn't be alone, right? When you feel like somebody is actively suicidal, do not leave an actively suicidal person alone. That's really, really important. Okay. You might not be the person, right? I don't want you to shy away from asking these questions because it's not a person that you're very close to, or it's not a person that you necessarily want to walk down this road with. That's okay. You don't have to, right? You don't have to be everybody's person. Ask the question, keep people alive, right? And then connect them with their person, right? That's a worthwhile effort too, right? Let's go, okay, great. Let's get you some professional help. Who can I call in the meantime? Your sister, your best friend, your mom, your grown son? Who is it? Who can I call, right? So we want to connect them with that person. You don't have to stay with every person that you identify as being actively suicidal, right? I walked through that one time with a neighbor who I cared very much about, but I was not that person, right? I'm not going to be that that person that is going to stay at her house, right? I don't know her like that, but I care about her. So we had the conversation. I connected her with a resource. I called her sister. Boom. Now I get to step out of it, and I've made that connection. So that's really important to not shy away from having those conversations with folks who maybe you aren't super close to, right? Still hard, really hard, particularly when it comes to boundaries. That's like a whole other webinar. But when it is somebody that you care about, like what does that look like when you are their person? It's going to look different, but the beginning's not going to look different. We're going to ask the questions, ask the hard questions. If you get a not know, we're going to ask the follow-up questions, right? And then we're going to connect them to resources, right? So because here's the thing, not everything, oh, I didn't say one thing that I really want to say. The third reason, I can't believe I missed that. The third reason why it's incredibly important to say the word is because if your credibility, okay? If I am in a really dark place and you are asking me questions and you can't even say the word, what makes me think that you can handle what I have to say? I'm going to give you the standard cleaned up answer because I don't think you can handle it, right? So that's the other really important reason, right? We have to be not afraid to say those things out loud, right? And be that friend, right? Like my friends in my friend group are really well trained. They know they can't say stupid stuff around me, so they'll say something and then they'll be like, "No, Laura, I'm not thinking of killing myself," right? And we laugh about it and they make fun of me, but guess what? If any one of them was thinking of suicide, guess who they know they can come to? They know they could bring that to me, and that I'm like, I'm ready for this. I've been asking you this for years, right? So like, they know that I can have that conversation, right? And I know sometimes it's strange to see somebody talking about suicide and self-harm and laughing and having, right? But these conversations don't have to be, they're scary enough, right? Let's normalize talking about them, because I will say lower level thoughts of suicide are way more common than anybody ever talks about, right? Just because somebody has had thoughts of suicide or a preoccupation with thoughts of our own mortality, right? There are phases in our life where we get stuck in that place sometimes, right? It doesn't mean that person actively wants to die or is actively suicidal, right? So let's unpack that with people. Let's ask those questions, right? So before I open it up to questions, I want to sort of recap. We covered a lot, right? But I want to recap sort of those conversation blueprints, because I know that's what you came here for. How do we have these conversations, right? So early level conversations where we're concerned about mental health. We're not really sure if this is a suicide crisis or not. We maybe don't have those red flags yet, but we're worried. That's the, I'm concerned about you. Here's why. And do you want to talk about it? And I'm here for you, right? That's that really good formula that we want to follow for that, okay? When we are in a self-harm or suicide behavior situation, right? That looks like directly asking the question, are you thinking of killing yourself? Do you have thoughts of suicide? Is this something that we need to talk about? Because we can, right? And then the answers are either going to be this emphatic, you're the crazy person for asking me that, right? That's good. You want that. Okay. That's the no. If we get anything else, we want to follow it up. Okay. We want to do a little more digging if it's super vague, and we want to directly ask what the plan is if it's not super vague, right? Gosh, thanks for sharing that with me. How How far are you along in this process? Have you thought about how you would do it, or like what, you would do? And then we want to address that. We always want to follow up a potential suicide crisis with professional help, connect them with not only their person, their support structure, but professional help. You may or may not know, a lot of people I'm finding don't know that you can actually call the crisis line. You can call Meridian, you can call Meridian's MRT, anybody else's MRT crisis line, mobile response team, and you can just talk. You don't even need them to come out. You can call if the person says buzz off and walks out of the room and slams the door. You can call and say, hey, this is my name and I'm calling about a friend of mine. I'm calling about my neighbor. I'm calling about my daughter. Like, I'm not really sure where to go from here. And you can talk to a crisis counselor and get walked through what those next steps might need to be, okay? So keep those numbers handy, right? Know those numbers before you need them, so that you can walk through those conversations. We don't leave actively suicidal people alone, right? But we also don't want to be Baker acting everybody that, that decides to share that maybe they've had these thoughts, right? We want to see where they are in this process first. And if they're not actively suicidal, let's get them some help. Let's get them that appropriate help and make sure that we're there for them. Okay. And Meridian's phone number. Those are the two kind of for this area, maybe to the National Suicide Hotline, right? Local resources are I prefer them. Now you make your own choices with that, resources or resources, but I prefer local resources, local to where you are, because it eliminates the whole passing off, like having to sort of, you might be able to get an appointment with that agency and you can kind of begin that process for treatment, because it's not going to be, whatever the crisis folks provide is going to keep the person alive, but we need some follow-up, right? And we need to make sure that we're staying healthy and we're really getting in a place where we're not back in that spot, okay? What questions do you guys have? Felix, I'm so sorry. I know I saw your hand. I saw your direct messages. I know that you were having trouble with audio. I checked it all out on my end. It wasn't on my end, unfortunately, but I hope you are back with us at least, or heard some of that. But does anybody have any questions for me, or anything maybe that I didn't cover that you're curious about, or anything?
Well, yeah, I saw Felix had his hand up, but I don't know if he is able to say. So I'll ask. Yeah, my name is Shanti Vani, and I've been in Gainesville since 1979. I was an inpatient in a mental hospital in 1978 before I came here, and I've had a lot of grief and challenges in my family life, and my daughter was at Meridian, Naomi, around probably 2012 or 13, and she was in Meridian for a while. We visited her there. She died in 2015, alone in her room. And then I ended up going to the suicide survivors support group at the crisis center for a while, even though it was not an actual direct suicide. It was related with her addiction, depression, lack of self-care, whatever. So anyway, I guess what I'm looking at right now is there's a crisis going on in my family, and my hands have sort of been tied by a family member who's telling me to mind my own business. And I had this child, my granddaughter, is in county jail. She's been arrested on very serious charges. And I did have one of your forensic peer specialists visit her the very first, when she was first in there, but it's been over a month now. And that was a male, and she's a mother. She's a mother who's now away from her two children, who are 3- and 6-year-old boys, and their father's in prison. And I'm very concerned about her. So I was wondering if you guys have some females who could visit her and, just really give her a little more support, because I know he handed her some referral papers and stuff, but I doubt she's picked up on it. And the level of disturbance has been ongoing for a very long time in a very deep way. So I just, anyway, I'm looking for actually, what's the next right thing for me to do? Should I just try to bust through that brick wall? I see you have a brick wall in your picture there.
I know, right?
Yeah, just say, hey, I'm not backing off. I'm here. It's just a real hard place to be.
It's a very difficult place to be. And number one, Shanti, thank you for sharing your story with us. That we appreciate that. I think it's helpful for a lot of people, and I'm sorry that you suffered that loss. In terms of the current situation, yeah, and I think you kind of know that. So I'll validate that and support you and tell you, yes, girl, bust through that brick wall. Like, it is your business. Care about the people you care about, and we can do, we can bust through walls gently, where we can go, I love you, but sorry, this is my business and this is what I'm doing, right? In terms of your very specific question about, can we get female forensics out there? I'm not in the forensics department, but I would be more than happy to connect with them for you. And if you could, my email address is in the chat. If you could send me an email with the client's name, and what facility they're currently in, I will be happy to personally walk down to our forensics director and say, hey, this came up on our webinar. What can we do for this client? And see if there is a female that we can get out there for you. Okay.
Yeah. And would I be able to talk to that person before they go?
Sure. I will ask all that too. I mean, I don't work in forensics, so I don't want to make you all these promises, maybe not. But I'll ask that question for sure. I'll carry all that information down there and try to give a warm handoff where I can connect you with a person that could possibly make that happen for you. I think that's important.
Okay. Yeah.
All right. So I look forward to your email, Shanti. Thank you so much.
Yeah. And then the other thing I just want to share for people's information is, as a result of all these challenges, I am now my home-based business is in grief recovery. And I've been, I'm preparing to train people who help other people in grief work. So, because I think at the root of all of this is always that pain that's not come out and not been helped,
Sure.
So.
Beautiful. We might want to talk about having you on our podcast. Meridian does a podcast. Joy and I actually co-host that. It's called The Brain Factor, and it drops on the first Wednesday of every month.
Oh, wow. Great. Yeah.
Everywhere that you can find podcasts. But when I get your email, I'll follow back up with you, and we'll talk about
all right, great.
Maybe connect on that as well. So
thanks.
I love it.
Thank you.
Does anybody else have any questions or comments or anything they want to share, or any more information you want?
Hey, Laura, it's Mary. I just wanted to share and just say thank you that I was a mom that had a daughter who was self-harming. And I wish that I had seen this, 10 years ago, or, because I, called the psychiatric department. I didn't know what to do. So I think it's an important message to give to our parents, because I had to wait many weeks for that appointment, and the whole time worrying about my daughter. And if I had had a 24-hour telehealth or, all of this to reach out to, I could have gotten that information sooner. So I'm so grateful for this information that, other people can benefit from it now. They can get help when they need it.
Wonderful. Thank you, Mary. Thanks for sharing always. I know you're so transparent about that every time we see you, and I appreciate that so much. It really helps educate other people and make people feel less alone, and be able to navigate that as well. It's a good segue too. Something else I want to share is what we talked about today is snippets from our mental health first aid course. And that is an 8-hour certification course it's very much like CPR. Like, you take CPR, you're not a doctor, you're not a nurse, right? You take it as a regular person because you want to be able to help if you intervene, if you come across somebody who's having a physical health crisis. Mental health first aid's the same thing, but for mental and emotional crises. It teaches the non-clinical professional sort of how to recognize and respond and get people to help, and what are those helpful things to do and say. So we teach those. We do have a grant where we're able to teach those for free for the next 5 years. So if I'll say two things. Our Facebook page is a great place to go if we're having a community class. If you're just a kind of a onesie twosie and you want to plug into a class, do that. We also, reach out to me if your organization or your church or your company or whatever wants to provide that to either your population you serve or your staff. We can provide that as well. And if there's a need outside of that I haven't thought of that involves mental health first aid, shoot me an email, and we'll, if we can make it happen, we will. So wanted to let you guys know that's where this content mostly came from. I peppered in some of the stuff from that training with the DoD that I was telling you about, but most of it is that. So yeah, Felix, how do I get the certification for it? For the mental health first aid, you're going to want to either go on our Facebook page to plug into a community class, or if you're part of an organization that wants to do it for your organization, you have a group of people, shoot me an email and we'll be able to set that up. And then after you take the 8-hour certification course, you would take the quiz and then you would get your certification that would last you 3 years, just like CPR, right? It's a nice bullet on the resume, but it also gives tools like Mary was talking about. Like, I didn't know where to start. It was a scary thing. I didn't know what to do, right? I was constantly worried. It helps give us tools to be able to navigate those things better when we know what the research and the science says, and we know what's effective, and we know those markers that we should be hitting, right? We can handle those things with a little more confidence, even though it's never going to feel good on the inside, and that's okay. It's not supposed to. It's scary stuff, right? But if we can use those tools, we can do that well. So let me repost my, or did Joy, did you do that? Perfect. Okay. Joy just reposted my email. There was a request for that. So if you want to follow up, oh, Felix, great. Okay, so what you're going to want to do, you took the class, you just need the certification. What you're going to want to do, if you took it through us, at some point in the process, you received an email from someone named Madeline Adkins. She probably, if you took it on Zoom, she sent you the Zoom link. If you took it recently, she sent you the thing that you have to make the account for, or she just sent you the reminder of when and where your class was. So you're going to want to email her. If you can't find that, just email me. My email's there and I'll just loop her in our conversation, and just let her know when and where you took the class, and she will be able to figure out why you didn't get that certification, and then we'll bypass whatever we need to make sure you get it. Okay. All right. And then Joy, you want to take this one? Mary wants to know where the link for the recording of the webinar will be and future webinars.
Sending it out to you after this is over.
Perfect. Awesome. Well, if there are no more questions, I will let you guys enjoy the rest of your day. And thank you for spending your lunch hour with us. I really appreciate that. And I hope to see you soon.
Thanks.
Thank you so much, Laura.
Thank you.
These are signs and symptoms to report to the doctor.
Joy, are you able to pop some of those phone numbers in the chat while I field some questions?
Yep, I'm about to do that right now.
You rock. I knew you probably were. Thank you so much. So Joy's going to drop the Allegheny Crisis hotline in there.